Happy Monday. Ta-da. People, hope everyone had a great weekend. Wow, I had an amazing weekend. What did I do? I was sick Saturday, and then I worked out Sunday, and then I tried to write. So that's pretty much my weekends, working out and working. I know it sounds amazing. People are jealous, but hey, it makes me happy. Anyways, let's not get into that. But I do want to get into something which it's pretty interesting if you like comedy, because it's probably one of the most iconic showbiz jobs that I happen to have coming up. And it was, if you like comedy, you know what this is. I was a door guy at this place called the Boston Comedy Club in New York City. And the reason why a lot of comedy nerds know about it is because it was recently featured on the show called Crashing on HBO. This guy named Pete Holmes, he's a comedian, and he made a show about it, produced by Judd Apatow. And he was basically a door guy at the Boston Comedy Club. Or I don't know if I actually didn't really watch the show, but I know the premise. But he worked the door at this club, and he passed out flyers, and in exchange, he got stage time. And I had that exact job that Pete had. In fact, I think I had it a few years before Pete got that job. So it's there's a pretty strong lineage of comedians who had that job. And I'm going to tell you how I got that job and what went down there, because it's, in retrospect, I'm really proud of it, even though I hated it at the time, like most things. But here we go. So I go to NYU, right? I don't know what I'm doing there. I'm in the film school. And, I like movies and I like comedy, but more so I just really like comedy, right? And I'm like, oh, Dave Attell, who's a comedy hero of mine, and Adam Sandler, they were all comedians starting out in college. And I was like, hey, I'm going to get a head start too. And I'm going to start performing. So I start going out and about to all these clubs in New York City, like the Comic Strip and Gotham Comedy Club and New York Comedy Club. By the way, my parents came to New York right when they dropped me off at school, and they were like, what do you want to do? And I was like, let's go to a comedy club, because I was so excited to go. And I picked the New York Comedy Club, and it was like the worst comedy club in the city. It looked like a rat hole. And I brought them there. My parents were like, this is what you want to do? This is insane. So I start my school year, and I'm trying to, figure out the comedy scene. And I take note, I just spent a year in Boston doing comedy, and I was doing really well there because, smaller markets, they encourage younger comedians, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is easy. Of course, I sucked. But for me, I was just, you're just passionate about anything. And I loved comedy. So I was like, the next step is I'm going to go to New York City. I'm going to make my move, because that's what you do, right? You try to go to bigger markets, and you try to just keep developing. And I had that mindset when I was young. So I went to New York I went to school there. Under the guise of going to school, I went to New York to do comedy. And I quickly realized this is a tough scene. This is a lot harder than I thought it would be, because you're starting to see really seasoned professionals. I always tell people, the LA comedy scene, it's really about being in film and TV, but the New York comedy scene, you have some legit comedians, people they're there to be comedians. And they're doing spots some of these guys you've never heard of, but they are killers on stage, and they've really dedicated their lives to stand-up if they never left New York. Now, I don't know why they never left New York, because I know every comedian, I guess, secretly kind of wants success. Why would you not want success? But I think a lot of New York comedians get comfortable where they are, and they never bother to leave, which is, an issue on its own. But it's a great place to get good. It's a great place to find your voice, whatever it is you want to do. And it'll kick the shit out of you, because New York is no joke. Go live in New York for a year without money and come back and talk to me, because it's a battle. So I'm doing all the open mics and whatever in New York, and these are late nights. These are late nights. I'm trying to do school and do comedy at nights, and I don't know what I'm doing. These open mics are death. They're death pretty much across the country for any comic who's ever tried to do an open mic. You're just sitting there trying out your stupid jokes in front of other new comedians who were just waiting to perform. So that was getting me nowhere. And I was really frustrated because, I researched all my idols, right? And they were like, oh, they got in at the comic strip, which I auditioned for, and I just never passed. I know. Anyways, I got really angry. They passed the season, sorry, but I was like, whatever. But I had a tough time getting into the comedy scene in New York City, like really finding a home club. And there was a club by my school called the Boston Comedy Club. Now, it's called the Boston Comedy Club, but it's in Greenwich Village, New York City, so don't get confused. And it was owned by this guy named Barry Katz, who is a comedy manager. And he also owned this club. And it was literally like 10 minutes from my house. So I'd go there at nights, and they let me watch the shows for free because I said I was a comedian. They were like, okay, just go sit in the back. Comedy clubs are really good like that, especially the good ones. Like, they understand, like, these young comedians could be somebody in a few years, and they really foster and encourage people to come hang out. So I'm really appreciative of all the clubs that let me hang out over the years. So I start going there pretty much every night. I'm like hanging out there at this club. And it's really interesting because the guys, I remember the Monday nights, there was this thing called New Talent Mondays. It was like a bringer show, and that's where you have new comedians bring their friends to the show, and then you perform. And that was run by this guy named Alan and David J., who is now a big TV writer. His name is DJ Nash. I think he has a couple shows on the air. And the other guy who helped run that show, if I'm not mistaken, was Ed Helms, who's a big movie star now. So I know Ed from way back when, but I haven't talked to him in years. So it was interesting to see the comedy scene as a young college student. And of course, I did that show a couple times too because I was in college, but I didn't really have any friends back then either. So I only did the show like twice. I only had like 6 friends at school. So I couldn't really bring many people to the show. So, but they had this job there. They had this job there as a doorman, right? And basically, there was a host who pretty much ran. Barry Katz, the owner of the club, was never there. I rarely saw him there. But the host of the club, his name was Louis Schaefer. He now lives in England. I'm Facebook friends with him. You can find him on Facebook. He pretty much ran that club as the host. He was there every single night, and he had a door guy, right? And together, Louis and the door guy would like pull people in off the streets and seat them at the comedy club. And it was really interesting to watch because this guy Louis, man, he would just approach anybody on the street, college kids, whatever, and bark. It's called barking, and he'd bark them into the club. And the door guy would also do the same. And I remember when I got there, the door guy was named Bert Kreischer. Bert Kreischer. I don't know how to say his last name, but he's a huge comedian now too. He's really big. You can Google him. And so it was Bert and Louis, and they would bark people off the street. And I heard before Bert had that job, Sarah Silverman had that job, who's she's a named comedian. Neil Brennan had that job, who created the Chappelle Show. He's also a named comedian. So just this, I knew that, and I knew that it was a hard job to get, and a good job to get because one, you're there at the club every night, you got paid something, but more importantly, you got to perform late at night on the lineup after everybody went up. So it was a good way to just perform in front of real crowds. I hung out there so much when Bert left, they ended up hiring me. I forget the order of this, but it was like me and Dov Davidoff. Dov Davidoff is another successful comedian. You can tell I'm not trying to name drop here, just what it is. So Dov and I worked the door at the Boston Comedy Club, and then Dov left, and there was a series of people that came in and worked with me as a door guy. But it was really cool because I think of all my jobs, that really taught me how to approach people. I have no fear approaching people and talking to people, mostly because of this job, which I had for years in college, of just approaching random people on the street, ask, girls would walk by, I'd be like, hey, hot girls in free. They'd like walk right by me, ignore me. I'd be like, so if you see any hot girls, let them know it's a comedy show. I'd be like, fuck you, asshole, whatever. Stuff like that. You kind of just pick up little lines here and there. And I wasn't amazing. I was decent at it. But most importantly, from having an opportunity, I got to see these young comedians perform at the club. Like I had this comedy, because you're waiting pretty much. After you fill up the club, you stand by the door, but, there's like a dead zone where you just like nobody's coming in. So you just come in and watch the show. The people I got to see coming up, I mean, most people couldn't believe the lineups. If you're a comedy nerd, you get it. Let's see, like an average lineup, it'd be like Mark Maron, Patrice O'Neill, Bill Burr, when he went by Billy Burr, DC Benny, Russ Maneve, Judah Freelander, Kevin Hart was there every night. Saw Dane Cook occasionally. It was just this killer lineups every single night, and these guys were not famous. So I feel like that was my comedy education, because I really saw the writing. For me, I was like, oh, how can I be funny? And it definitely wasn't the performance aspect, but I was a good writer. So I gravitated more towards the writer comedians. I mean, in retrospect, I probably should have done that as a career, but I really learned a lot about comedy. And once in a blue moon, they would have, actually once every 6 months, they would have these showcases. So Barry, the owner of the club, who was also a manager, he would put up all his clients for industry showcases. And I remember Jay Moore was like his main guy. Jay Moore, another named comedian from Jerry Maguire. And Jay Moore would come down and it'd be like a rock star thing where the club would just be totally full. And it was awesome. It was awesome to see that, like just as a young college kid. And I remember when Howard Stern, the radio guy, when Howard Stern was looking for a replacement for Jackie, he actually came down and watched a comedian at the Boston Comedy Club. I saw so many famous people walk in there through the doors that I would obviously not charge them and be like, all right, I'm not going to charge Howard Stern. I remember the Wayans came in once, and there's so many Wayans brothers. I had no idea who the hell was who, and I didn't even know they had a sister. And there was a girl that walked in at the end, and I was like, oh, it's $10, and she went off on me. Kim Wayans. She was like, you know who I am? I'm fucking Kim Wayans. And I was like, okay, great, go, you're in. So it was cool. Like, it was really my first introduction to seeing anybody famous. Because look, the people who really worked the club were not famous, but there would always be drop-ins from LA. So when those drop-ins came from LA, like, I remember I saw, who did I see? It was like Tracy. No, it wasn't Tracy. Oh, Tracy Morgan did come by the club, but he wasn't super famous back then. I think it was like Bill Bellamy or somebody like famous from the, back then. And you'd be like, oh my God, these people actually went to Los Angeles and made it. I remember I saw Mitch Hedberg in the stairwell. Mitch Hedberg's a iconic comedian. I saw Richard Jeni, comedian. This guy ended up killing himself. He came by once. And it was just, a great, well, actually it sucked. I hated it. I'm not going to lie to you. The reason why it sucked because, you did that. I did that in the wintertime too. So, my God, New York winters. I mean, it's fun in the summertime when there's like, you're young, there's like girls and, you're having fun, but when it's like 10 degrees outside, you're outside trying to get people in the club, it's hell. And I did that for like 3-4 hours straight. But I thought I was paying my dues. I really thought that. And I did. I mean, no regrets. I did what I thought was the best thing at that moment in time. And, what happened with that job afterwards was, this was actually a great lesson because, I spent years trying to get into that club, and I kind of was in that club, where I can call in my spots, and I didn't have to work the door there anymore. And then literally, also, oh, by the way, my first kiss almost happened there. Like this girl, like the waitress tried to like kiss me, and I like fell over the chair. I didn't know what to do. But anyways, so the club ended up being sold to somebody else, and everybody who was part of that club, in terms of the lineup, got cleaned out, right? So every comedy club has like their own lineup pretty much, and they cleaned this all out. And I was like, what the fuck? I just spent 3 years working the door here, and now I can't perform here anymore. And I realized then that there's absolutely no loyalty in showbiz. Like, you can spend years at a company and you can be working one day and then you're out the next day. So that was that. And that was hard when that happened, but it was actually a good learning lesson because it forced me to go elsewhere. And, I went and met Adam Hunter at another club and met a whole new group of friends. So it was great to get out of the West Village. In fact, after that when I graduated school, I was finishing that club and I interviewed at this talent agency called the William Morris Agency. It's now called Endeavor. It's a huge agency. And they interviewed me to be part of the training program there to be an agent. And I knew more than the agents. Like, I was like a 22-year-old kid or 21 years old. And I seriously knew more about comedy than the agents. Not business-wise, but actual about comedy, like who was on the scene. Because I was plugged in every single night. And by the way, the only reason I didn't get that job was because they called my boss at the Boston Comedy Club, and she was like, "Oh, he's a great comedian." She didn't realize they were calling about me being an agent. She thought they were calling about me being a comedian. So whatever, I didn't really care that much. So that was it. I mean, that was a interesting time. And then years later, when Pete Holmes developed that show about crashing, it was called Crashing. I couldn't watch that show. It was just too hard for me to watch that show because he literally recreated everything from the Boston Comedy Club. I mean, I think I saw 1 or 2 episodes, and that was enough for me. I was like, I can't watch this show because it hit too close to home for me, and I just didn't want to watch it. I was like, God. In fact, I actually went back to New York City a couple of years ago, and I was like, well, I'm going to go back to that spot where I hung out and stood outside that club for years and see if it's still there. And the club's not even there anymore. Like, they revamped it into some other nightclub. It's not a comedy club. It's like a nightclub or something. And I just realized how ephemeral life can be, in a blink of an eye, everything that used to be there, like, it was such a big part of my nights in college, and it's totally gone. It's just erased. And I'm sure, nobody really gives a fuck. I mean, the great thing about it is now I see these guys. Some of these guys are really big comedians, and they say hi to me still, because they remember me as this young kid when I was in college, working the door every night. So that's always great. That always makes me feel good that, even though the club's not there, comedians always remember. And I mean, we're pretty insane, but for the most part, they do respect other comics paying their dues, because we all have to do that. So there you have it. The Boston Comedy Club. I don't recommend getting a door job. Actually, you know what? Don't listen to me. Don't listen to me. A lot of people still, I go to the Comedy Store sometimes and I see other door guys there. So there's a whole system of doormen in America of guys working at comedy clubs, and that's how they learn. So check into it, but it's not fun. Have a great day, guys. Bye.